On this week's episode of Scaffolds, we recorded the season finale. We are joined by Vaughn Gingrich of Lake Ontario Ag Consulting LLC, and we have our normal cast of hosts. However, I do want to warn that we did have some audio issues. I was recording from home without my expensive microphone here in Geneva, and I sound a bit like I'm underwater, and Anna was also unfortunately recording during a thunderstorm, and so there's a little bit of breaking up. But overall, I think it was an engaging conversation that was a comprehensive overview of what we experienced this season. See you this winter at the extension meetings. Okay, welcome to the season finale of Scaffold. I am here with Vaughn Gingrich again of Lake Ontario Ag Consulting. And as usual, we have Dr. Carrie Kopp, who is an associate professor of plant pathology at Cornell Agritech, and Dr. Ann Wallace, who is the New York State IPM Fruit Coordinator. So welcome, guys. I'm hoping we can jump right into an interesting conversation about how we think the season went overall.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So maybe we should start out talking insects, because I think the secondary part with diseases might be, well, we've got diseases and weather, to be fair. So I think with insects, last year we had this runaway woolies issue, right? And everyone was freaking out about that, but we're not having the same thing this year. I have my own thoughts on why I think that is, but what do you think, Fawn?
Yeah, so we did see woolies early on, very early on in the season, actually, and we didn't expect to at that point in the season. But since then, woolies have been fairly well under control for the most part, other than a few flare-ups here and there. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Last year, we had a really significant freeze at a really critical time that I think knocked out a bunch of beneficial insects for us. And that was not the case this year. And I think that's been part of it. And then I think growers been much more aware of the situation with woolly aphids after last year and have taken action earlier this year to knock back some flare-ups and keep things under control better than we normally have in the past.
Yeah, I 100% agree. We had to flare our trial because the beneficials were just knocking down the controls to the point where, can we even use this as a trial spot? So yeah, I think the beneficials work, and thinking about how to design programs in the future that are based on those weather events, and also just being soft on the beneficials for woolies. I think our trap captures for lepidopterans were slightly higher than last year overall, was my sense, but everything seemed to be under control. We've been starting our damage assessments in commercial farms, and they look very clean. So I think for insects, it was a pretty, other than that early woolies outbreak, pretty straightforward. And our IPM program, continues to be pretty strong on the insects. So I think with that, go ahead, Kirk.
Usually we see like San Jose scale, we see European apple sawfly and 1,000 stings. Are these insects, all the other things, the codling moths, are they all falling into the same boat of it just got to freeze? Or why don't I see all those as well? Or are they following the path of the woolly or something different?
Yeah, so I think we are seeing some spots of all of these insects here and there, but I would characterize it as a fairly normal year for us, where we have these little flare-ups here and there, we have these little hot spots, but no big overriding problems across a lot of acres.
And I think a lot of the treatment program is really tailored to control a lot of those secondary pests. We'll see how that evolves as things continue to get removed from the toolbox. But I don't know. I think it's been pretty calm, and I was expecting a more monstrous event.
Yeah, leading into that, what about the ambrosia beetle? I feel like me, even as a pathologist, have seen more of that nonsense pest than I ever have in other seasons in recent years. Is it just because diseases are compromising the plants, or we're getting flooding, or the insect loves the weather?
Yeah, I guess we don't fully have a handle on that. I would say certainly we are seeing a fair amount of tree stress out there. We're seeing a lot of tree decline in general in the last couple of years. And that probably is part of it because as those trees decline, they're putting off ethanol, and that's attracting the ambrosia beetles. So that's part of it. Maybe part of it too is we're still seeing some populations increasing after the loss of lower span. It's been several years now, but those populations still could be in a general increase as a result of that.
So what we're seeing in my lab is we've actually found a new species that's attacking apple. and its flight patterns are different. So they're flying more consistently throughout the year, and the tree attacks are happening more consistently. Usually, we thought of this as an early season pest with the black stem borer, which is Xylema gloros bananas. But this new species, Anisandrus maisch, is flying all year long, and we're still capturing it right now in really high numbers. So we think that's part contributing to what's going on. And we also think finding out this winter that they overwinter larvae, that soft winter that we had may also be propelling their populations, because we've always caught them in low numbers. But this year we are seeing a much higher number of them.
Yeah, back to you said it was a fairly normal year or average year. Maybe that's the word you used. What's normal anymore? But the degree day accumulation in the beginning of the season were quite early, and the degree days throughout the season was way earlier, maybe a week or more, especially in Western New York than in other parts of the state. We were a little bit ahead of average, but not that much. And so I'm wondering, when you say normal year, do you think things were out early and it was important to be scouting for them and monitoring, or how much did that change for you this year?
Yeah, when I said normal year, I meant in terms of population levels of these insects. Certainly we're out scouting for them normally any given year. Certainly this year with woolly aphids, we were scouting for them much earlier than we ever have in the past because of concern after last year. But yeah, I don't think it's been any different for us really than normal in terms of scouting for these insects. Control programs have mostly been the same, other than maybe some more frequent sprays at some times recovering after heavy rains. But other than that, no, I think it's been a fairly, quote, normal year in terms of insect controls in a lot of ways.
Yeah, maybe we should transfer over to pathology. I think I'll let Carrick lead that conversation.
Yeah, all right. So I know Monique and I have just been on one extension visit after another, looking at declining trees, maybe a combination of winter injury, chronic but normal herbicide use, and a lot of wet weather. And I'm curious to see what Vaughn's take is on a lot of these things. Is it just a lot of different things adding up, making the beetle a player as well? And we've even seen some late fire blight. Your thoughts on the tree decline situation and maybe the role of things like Botrysperia and other junk, Vaughn?
Yeah, I think we're still trying to get a handle on all of this, to be honest. Certainly there's a lot of factors going on. We've had more winter injury the last couple of years, as we've had some overall softer winters, but also winters that have and springs that have had huge variations and in temperatures and very quick temperature swings at times. So we've seen more winter injury from that. Certainly we're seeing more issues with spot rots, we think, in trees. I know I'm seeing more at times. And yeah, as we get some of these heavy rains, especially this year, you have some acres that go underwater and that stresses trees. So yeah, I think it's probably a number of factors that are all kind of coming together. And the ambrosia beetle is part of the equation. It is hard to know sometimes whether that's first or that's second, whether they're moving in or, weakening trees, or if the trees are already weakening and then that brings the beetles in. But yeah, it's all part of the equation.
It seems like it's happening a lot in younger, smaller trees. And I'm wondering if we're not able to buy as feathered or as thick diameter trees. Every time I try to buy trees for myself, all that's left are the whips. And I wonder if not having a lot of really quality trees and getting them well established is a role. My colleague Mark Fuchs mentioned that, and root systems and other things like that as well. What are your thoughts on what's being affected? Is it weak and sort of trees that are struggling to get started, or is it or something else?
I think at times it is some weaker trees that we're having trouble getting started. I think a lot of it too is pushing these trees really hard to try and get them to fill their spaces. Guys, when they're planting trees now, a lot of times they're trying to get a partial crop the second year they're in the ground, and they're pushing trees very hard to do that. The result of that is at times, I know I've been seeing young tree growth going too late into the fall and not shutting down properly. And that then obviously makes them more susceptible to winter injury issues. So yeah, we're definitely seeing an increase in these young trees. I know in my observations, it kind of seems to be a time frame from about third to fifth leaf on these trees where we see a lot of trees go down, and a lot of times it seems like once we kind of get through that period, it stabilizes a little bit.
Yeah. Before we go to Anna, third to fifth leaf, wasn't that around the time we used to see all those rad issues? Wasn't it trees typically affected like that?
Yeah, it is. It's kind of in that same age time range, and I don't know if that's a part of it or not. And I don't know if the industry ever fully narrowed down what all the factors were with RAD. There's still a lot of questions there. I know there's still a lot of research going on. So maybe this is all part of the same thing, and maybe all of this is a whole lot of factors coming together in that age range of trees.
I just might want to add to that real quickly, talking about the rad sad. We tried to advertise. Carrie Peter at Penn State University had a really great decline summit summarizing all of the different reasons and all the amazing research that's going on related to apple tree decline. And that is recorded if people want to learn more about what people are working on at the university level. But there are so many things that cause decline. So I'm glad that we're all continuing to look at that. I wanted to add earlier, you were talking about younger trees, smaller trees, third to fifth leaf. I was having conversations with people about the root system being so small to support the trees as we're pushing them. So I think you kind of started answering my question already, but are you looking at the root system? What do you think about roots and soils that could potentially be contributing to tree survival?
Yeah, certainly we're putting a lot more focus now on soil health and root system health, soil microbiology than we ever did in the past. I don't think we're there yet, personally, as an industry. I think we've got a lot to learn. I think we've got a lot of things we need to figure out in that range of issues. But certainly, yes, as we push these trees really hard, we do need to keep the root system keeping up with that in order to support it. And we have at times seen some root disease issues. We've also seen issues with cold injury right at the soil line. So yeah, it's all part of it.
Are there root stocks that are better at roots? I used to see all the tables of the Geneva root stocks, et cetera, and it never ever says like super vigorous roots. It was usually advertising other characteristics. Do we know? Or maybe if Waze was here, he'd be able to tell us. Do we know which ones are the best rooting root stocks?
I would be willing to bet that the nursery people have a pretty good handle on that. We're still trying to figure it out. Certainly, there are a couple of rootstocks in my experience that I would say are just in general more sensitive to stress, and we see that manifest in a number of ways, even as trees get older, in terms of return bloom and thinning issues and all of that. But yeah, that's all something that is an industry I think we need to get a better handle on.
That's a perfect segue to what I was going to bring up. So the thing that's been brought to my attention that I didn't really know how fully this was going on across the industry, but the on-farm nurseries. What are we thinking about that as it relates to RadSab? Because this seems a little bit like the wild, wild west out there with what's going on. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, certainly that's been a development in the industry in recent years, a lot more on farm nurseries. I see guys that do it really well, and I see guys that don't do it very well. It's a very different mindset than producing trees otherwise. One of the things that does concern me a little bit is where they're getting their budwood from. Are we bringing in a lot of virus issues potentially? And some of the different ways of producing these trees. Are we producing trees that are just weaker and more susceptible to issues? And at times, I think it's possible that we are.
I was going to kind of bring up something that was maybe more on your radar. I just feel like all season long, we were talking about the leaf spot pathogens. What is it, just more leaf wetness this year that we had more of those, or is there some other climatic thing going on that I don't understand?
I know in my observation in the last 3 to 5 years, we've seen a general increase been happening over time. This year, there certainly has been a lot more of it than in the past. I think part of it is probably the wetter year. I think part of it too is having some acres last year that were not picked or were not fully picked. We see more mummy fruit in some of these trees, and that becomes a harbor. So yeah, it is an increasing issue, and this year has been worse. The weather is part of it, but it's not all of it.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. The first thing I did was turn to my colleagues at North Carolina and West Virginia because they have hot, wet weather all summer long, and we're seeing the same thing. Some of the things they complained about is the loss of Xyram. They're having the same problems as well, and a lot of them, including Carrie Peter, I think mentioned in an email, she's like, I'm saving all my single sites for after pedal fall from this point on, because I think we're seeing a shift with our weather trends in general, whether it's soft winters or whether that these other things are coming in harder and stronger in the summer. Now, the question being is, are they really compromising our trees a lot? Are they leading to the phenomenon of poor wintering? I don't think they're causing them to grow. In the strawberry world, you need a lot of leaf spot before you actually compromise a strawberry plant, about 25 to 30% coverage of every leaf. So it's hard to really say what their impact, or are they just scaring us into doing more?
Yeah, I most of the time I don't think we're seeing enough leaf loss to really be a long-term concern of weakening the trees too much. But as we continue to see more and more over the years, are we going to get to the point where that's an issue? The other thing is, quite frankly, in 2023, right at the end of the season, we did have some fruit spotting show up that I think there was a number of different causes in different cases, but in some cases, I think some of that, without having done the testing, I think some of it could have potentially been apple blotch. And if that's the case, we've never really seen the fruit lesions here in Western New York very much in the past. So why are we seeing more now all of a sudden, potentially?
I think you maybe started answering my question, but I was going to ask about whether it's more of one thing or another, more of previously known as Marsanina blotch, or if it's glomerella, or if it's apple necrotic leaf blotch. If it's something is becoming more prevalent than another because they have different management implications, right? And I also wanted to say thank you so much to Carrick. We've created this folder sort of behind the scenes of photos that we can share really quickly and get a good diagnosis on things. So everybody, all the extension specialists, I don't know, maybe other people are doing that with you as well, Carrick, but we've been really grateful to have some quick looks from you and diagnosing things from the field.
Yeah, it would also be good to get Vaughn if we could somehow invite a non-Cornell person in on that folder, because then the consultants see a lot of stuff as well. And then we could sort these types of things. I've seen a lot more Marsanina. It was really bad last year, and that's where I got all my fruit spot pictures on our things that we didn't treat after second cover with single site fungicides or mancozeb, because we're following the rules. And we had Jonagolds and the Goldens, much like Vaughn talked about at last week's meeting, just go poof, and it's ink blotchy and it's intense. And I watched the crab apples. But this year, my research orchards didn't get as much, but they're loaded with apple scab. And so I think my scab outcompeted them. But if a grower managed scab, they might see more of the other. And I felt like this is the first year I've seen necrotic leaf blotch on a lot of different cultivars that aren't historically reported. And I think Vaughn may have as well. I'm going to let him comment.
Yeah, certainly we've seen a lot more necrotic leaf blotch this year, especially on galas, which I guess before this year we've probably seen it on galas some before, but I've never really looked close enough to realize it was necrotic leaf blotch, and maybe I thought it was glomerella or Marsanina. The other thing, I would agree, we're seeing more Marsanina. Glomerella is showing up some. It's out there, but it's necrotic leaf blotch and Marsanina or apple blotch that we're seeing increasing more.
So for the overall fungicide program, did you feel like there were, with all of these different issues going on, were there any limitations on options?
Yeah, so it becomes a matter of timing. We certainly have done some more fungicide sprays this year with the wet season and with apple scab showing up the way it has. Every year it is a challenge when you get down to the end of the year and managing what chemistries you have left available to use. And it's a matter of managing around that. Going forward into the future, I'm not sure where we're going to need to go with our fungicide program. I do think we probably need to do a little bit more with single site materials on closer timings around the bloom period and shortly after the bloom period. But I also don't think we're going to end up in a position where we can totally depend on the multi-site materials pre-bloom because of what's going on the regulatory side of that. If we end up with some longer reentry intervals with mancozeb and that, and then also on the Captan side as well, that really becomes very difficult to manage at that point. How are we going to use those materials on the kind of intervals that we need to here in the Northeast and still be able to get in our orchards and do the work we need to do the scouting we need to do? That's going to be tough.
Yeah, along those lines, I'm now pushing more, trying to put copper in more heavy or in the early season because we're not going to get all of these things. And we might have to rely on the AP fungicides, the Scala and the Vanguard. And we might have to go back to relying on Dodine more. I wish they would remove the restriction on pink for Dodine so we could keep that one, because that one's not really good for the later stuff. But all of those other ones are fantastic on scab. But if we have warmer seasons, the APs won't work as well. And then we're left kind of stressing out. Maybe we'll have to do double inoculum reduction just to try to get rid of some of this stuff.
Yeah, and something I am starting to stress more and more with my growers that really was not done very much here in the past is the idea of sanitizing orchards and doing those sorts of things to help us out. And we just need to do everything we can, in my opinion, to try to reduce those inoculum loads. They're going to be here no matter what. We have enough wild apples around in the area and abandoned apples in the area that we're going to have these inoculum loads, but at least let's try to get some of that out of our orchards and help ourselves out.
I'm so glad that you just emphasized that, Vaughn. I had a couple conversations just this week with the field meetings that were happening about doing better sanitation and how we've moved away. A couple of individuals moved away from brushing all of the brush to the center and flail mowing. Just with the smaller trees, I think it's not needed as much anymore. And so I'm wondering if you're pushing more of like urea applications in the fall. I think that came up at the Western New York orchard tour. Either that was you or Carrick, but what else can we do for sanitation? And I might just share one other anecdote. There's a grower that I've worked with a little bit who's an organic grower, has very limited options, but what he does is he vacuums all of his leaves off of the orchard floor. So he doesn't have an herbicide strip, but he has an attachment on his like small tractor and he physically removes all of the inoculum and he doesn't have a scab problem. So to me, that's a huge demonstration of what inoculum removal can do for managing scab. That's obviously not practical in a conventional normal orchard, but yeah, what else are you recommending to improve sanitation?
Yeah, so this is something that I've been bringing on slowly in terms of talking with growers. But yeah, urea applications is one of the options. There is the option of flail mowing. There may be some option. Some growers are toying with the idea a little bit of tillers within the herbicide strip for a number of reasons. That could potentially be helpful too, to also cut up some of that leaf matter, get it mixed into the soil and breaking down a little bit more. And then obviously, the other practice that we can do in terms of just as we're doing our winter pruning, cut cankers out of the trees, remove those mummy fruit that are still hanging, those sorts of things. Anything that we can do to get that leaf matter and those mummy fruit out of the orchards, or cut up and in contact with the soil or mixed up with the soil is all helpful.
Maybe I'm going to switch gears just a little bit to talk about some results that I had in our woolly apple trial, which was ARDP funded, looking at different gallons per acre of these treatments and these were standard size trees. So I was pretty shocked by our results. We did not find significant differences by 50 and 100 gallons per acre for these treatments. And so I've had to walk back doing 100 gallons per acre because I intended to have this data to back up that recommendation and it's just not there. So my thinking on that is that it has to do with our air humidity and that our droplet size is so tiny using air blasts, and that the 50 gallon per acre rate, the concentration of each droplet is going to be higher. How are you feeling about this, Vaughn? And maybe does that apply also to fungicide applications as well?
Yeah, to be honest, it was interesting for me to hear you talk about that at the meeting, and it's something I'd like to circle back around with you and find out more of your experiences with that over the winter. I don't honestly know yet. For us, we've always emphasized to get better coverage, especially in these larger trees, to go with the higher gallonage rates. Does that necessarily mean that's what you need to do to get good coverage? And honestly, I think that's what it comes down to is coverage, less so the amount of water and just simply coverage. So some guys are able to get really good coverage at lower gallons per acre, just depending on what sprayer they have, how they have it set up, how they're running it, those sorts of things. And the higher gallonages can at times just be a Band-Aid. Sometimes if you're a little bit iffy on your coverage, if you put more water out, that helps you get better coverage. So I don't know. it's an interesting topic, and it's something I'd like to talk more about, and it'd be interesting to talk more about it with, some of the experts too, with running these sprayers and getting coverage and what their thoughts are on that.
Monique, quick question. In your thing, did you calculate the tree row volume for each one and say, I'm going to go 50 gallons over the TRV, or I'm just going to do the gallons and the plants were all 100 tree row to the acre plants, 100 gallons to the acre plants? How did that work?
Well, we should have invited on Brad Palmer, who put on the treatments. So I know they were calculated at a rate so we did 2 tree blocks, and we calculated the rates based on those up to 50 and 100 gallon coverages. I think that another element, because the study was done focusing on woolies, we did have a good year for the beneficials. So I don't know how interactive that is with the overall result, but it's hard to say. It's hard to untangle because a lot of growers haven't necessarily said, oh yeah, I don't feel like I'm getting very pocket experience. Certain people will say, I'm not getting good control with the product. For example, Movento. And, we're in the situation with Movento too, where we're kind of waiting for that next generation, the contact product, to come out. So it's a delicate conversation, but I feel like it's also an uphill battle to convince people to do the 100 gallons per acre because it can be really frustrating. It takes more time. You're essentially using more gas too because of the refills. So it's a tough conversation to have, but I didn't know if you guys had seen anything similar with fungicides, or if it was just like on the insecticide side that I tend to be seeing this in this one study, by the way.
Yeah, I appreciate that. On the fungicide side of things, my observations, I don't know as we normally see a whole lot of difference. I do think some products, especially for scab, I think sometimes lower gallons per acre actually can be better. But other than that, I guess I don't have a real good handle on that.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. We're finding that our trees are like close to 100, our high densities, because we have a big fat row middle, but it probably should be spraying it to 75. But we sometimes find that 3x coverage to be a little bit better, particularly when we can with the fungal diseases, when we can blow through and grab the backside of that leaf. But a lot of it's just adjusting that fan speed, so you're not blowing through 5 rows, but you're blowing through just enough. And when I have a backpack sprayer on, it's real easy because I can stand back further. I can pull more wind on the thing to drop that volume right in the middle. Now, that's not an option for a grower, but I feel like there's all kinds of weird engineering donuts and other nonsense to try to drop your wind speeds down. It makes the job take longer, which is frustrating for those who spray, including myself, because I want to be done and there's not a lot of time.
Yeah, and just what you're talking about in terms of fan speed and what you want that spray doing. That's a conversation I have with my growers a lot. I very commonly hear, I know I'm getting good coverage because I can see the spray going 4 rows over. That does not mean you're getting good coverage. I am a very big proponent of doing coverage testing, especially post-harvest, where you can use things like Surround. Surround is a great tool to see what you're getting for coverage. Not enough growers do that kind of testing. I wish more would, because you can make any sprayer work or not work. It's all in the setup and how you run it.
So are we really hinging there on fan speed? Is that the variable on the sprayers that we think is the most maybe interfering with coverage, or is there also nozzle dynamic?
I think you have to, so there's ground speed, there's fan speed, and there's water volume. And all of those things work off of each other. And I think you have to try a lot of different things to see what works for your sprayer in your orchards, because you have different canopy sizes, different canopy thicknesses. That all matters, even from block to block, variety to variety. Sometimes can be some differences. Certainly, age of trees can bring in some differences. So it's you almost have to have, in my opinion, a setup that you're running, a certain set of settings you're running for each individual block, and then you throw the wind into it as well, and that can change things too. It's one of the reasons why the aerial old-fashioned sprayers in this area have been so popular, is because of the winds that we get a lot of times in the spring and the amount of air that they put out to fight the wind. And that is beneficial when you're talking about older, larger trees. But when you're talking about high density stuff, I don't think those are necessarily the right sprayer for us at times.
That's a very good point. I've often found that when I more meticulously care about what my droplets are doing, how much and where they're falling, I wonder if that's been the key to my unreasonable level of success that we have with the biologicals. As we move into more and more mild, even mild efficiencies, I would see those products be the first to fail of others. And I think maybe unless you have a well-adjusted, calibrated system for your particular orchard that's putting it all perfectly, probably shouldn't try those.
Yeah, I was thinking you mentioned Surround, and then another tool that's really good for testing coverage are those water soluble papers, or water identifying little yellow cards that turn blue when water hits it. And so I know people that are using that, and they also are calibrating their sprayers, having calibration services, and it has completely changed their coverage and their efficacy in their sprayers. And you're right, they do it for individual blocks for different size trees and different goals in their orchard systems. And I know that they're doing that a lot in other states. There were a couple of workshops here in New York this year. And so I encourage people to try to make it out there. And maybe if there's enough interest, we can generate more funding to do more programs here and get more services available for sprayer calibration.
Yeah,
At
the water
least
sensitive paper is a great tool as well. I just like Surround personally because it's a real quick and dirty. If you're missing the top third of the tree, you're going to know it right away when you spray Surround.
So I wanted to maybe close out the episode talking about what I feel like for the industry, well, at least in Western New York, is a major elephant in the room, and that's all of the hail damage that has been experienced. So I've heard complaints about how difficult it is to move people who have come here, H2A workers, and to different farms as needed. And I have heard some varying reports about how much damage there is. So, Vaughn, do you have any input on that?
Yeah, this is something we're trying to not talk about too much at the moment. But yeah, there is a fair amount of damage out there that I see. It is variable. There's a lot of acres out there where there's a few dings on apples here or there, but you can probably pretty easily pick through it. It's going to take a little bit more time. And then there's orchards that are a total loss. So yeah, it covered a lot of ground east to west for us. Thankfully, a fairly narrow strip north to south, but there's a lot of acres that have at least some level of damage.
Yeah, it seems like those who got it and got it bad, it's very bad. Like I was in some orchards last week and thinking, yeah, this is a total loss. There's nothing here that doesn't have any damage on it. And then I talked to some other growers who are nearby, maybe like 10 max miles away, and they're, oh yeah, missed stuff. So I think it's been a strange thing. And how common is it to experience hail at this point in the year? I didn't think that was common, but I guess it's upstate New York, and who knows?
Yeah, it hasn't been real common. There was some hail last year, actually, during harvest as well, right before we started picking snapdragons, thankfully in a fairly small area. But yeah, we can get hail anytime here from May until end of September. You never know when it's going to hit. It does seem like in the last few years it's been a little bit more common, unfortunately, but maybe that goes back to some of the more variable weather we've been seeing as well. But yeah, it is. I've got growers that I've got one grower in particular that's got a fairly high level of damage on the northern end of the farm. And you cross a hedgerow and go a half mile to the south on his same farm, and there's very little damage. And there's some damage out there that, yeah, it's the worst I've ever seen in a couple of spots.
Yeah, you alluded to the extreme weather. So I was thinking about, in addition to hail, it's been a really extreme year in terms of weather events. And I feel like we say that every year more and more, but we had a record number of tornadoes in the state this year. We had severe flooding in a lot of places and severe drought in other places in the Northeast. So thinking to the future, how do you talk to people about planning and we use this word resiliency. Is there anything we can be doing with that at this time? Like thinking about these more and more extreme weather events. How has that been impacting people this year? What should we be doing in the future?
Yeah, there's a number of things. We've been fairly good here in our region in the last number of years of guys being pretty proactive, putting in good tiling systems, but that certainly is part of it. Ground selection, especially now as we're entering a rough period of the industry. If you're planting orchard, I think you need to be a little bit more selective of where you plant, making sure that it's good orchard ground, making sure you've got good air drainage, trying to do those types of things to reduce the chances of having catastrophic events in those regards. We're seeing more and more hail netting. I think that's going to become more common in our area. Just in general, trying to keep trees healthy as much as possible. That increases resiliency, soil health, good fertility, not doing the wrong pruning at the wrong time and too much or too little of it, those sorts of things. Yeah, there's a number of things that you can do to increase your resiliency in the system.
So staying on top of everything really well. Sounds like it's a hard job. There are a lot of things to manage, but could we have people like you to support us in that work, Vaughn?
Any other last comments on weather shifts? Because I think in terms of insects, because we were moved up, it had some early season, like we were like, wow, okay, there's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of leps, but overall everything evened out. But for the diseases, obviously having a wetter year, what about, an instance of thunderstorms or more severe weather like that, those patterns moving around? Is that also helping to promote the disease progression in the field with what sounds like a complex of diseases at this point?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly with having a scab year here, once we got scab started, we kept getting rains weekly, and some of them very heavy rains washing off residues. So once we got scab, growers couldn't get it stopped. It has continued to progress all season. In a drier year, you could get it to stop. And at one point, we had a little bit of a dry spell, and it looked promising. And then it started getting wet again. So yeah, that definitely has been part of the story with the diseases this year.
Any additional comments, Kara?
No, I mean, I think that's just pretty much spot on. Well, so I have a variety of different treatments that we do: full, very aggressive conventional ones, and full, very aggressive biological ones. And a lot of our experiments involve like timing exactly for each one of those infection events. And that means going out and spraying on Sunday night, whatever. And we did them all. And it didn't matter if I had a program that was biologicals integrated with single sites or full on Captazeb, Mancozeb with single sites. Everybody looked terrible. And because I think it's just we didn't have a break. And a lot of times growers are going to think, what did I do wrong? And I'm like, you did nothing wrong. We had a typhoon and a tsunami, and you just can't beat it when the entire orchard washes away. Some of our trees that had weak connections on how far they were planted got knocked over. Yeah, probably partially due to the UV unit, but nothing really failed worse than another. They all failed equally at a commercial level. Now, that being said, everything was better than doing nothing. So in that case, something you kind of made it through, but it's a hard year. Now we're probably going to have 5 years in a row where we have no scab, and everyone will overspray and waste a lot of money, and we'll be really sad. But I thought scab was done until this year, but it's back.
Okay, so I feel like we can conclude on that. That was great, Carrie.